Good morning.
Good morning.
It is June 10th in the year of our Lord. See, I brought it back.
See, you brought it back.
Yeah, episode 48. I think this will be a free-ranging conversation with a general theme of white backlash, which we'll get into in a moment. But first, as always, let us introduce ourselves. I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
Daniel Wolpert, direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing. And Mark is sleepy today.
Yeah, my son has been having sleep issues, which pandemics, uprisings,
96-degree weather.
96-degree weather, and school's out, so he's not sleeping, and that means I'm not sleeping because even though he's 12, he needs to come and tell us when he can't sleep. Right. So now I'm sleep deprived.
Yeah, so which I'm incredibly sympathetic to because I have particularly one child that did not sleep well at all in the worst possible way. So
yay.
I get it.
So who knows
really painful.
Who knows what will emerge from my subconscious during this time? It'll be amazing. But yeah, just to generally, when the idea of white backlash, anytime any people of color, but in this particular instance, the Black community makes any gains, there's a white reaction that this drives a lot of white supremacist logic in our society. But right now, as we haven't really even made gains yet, we're talking about making gains, and it seems like there's momentum. And we're already starting to see responses, like different ways of white individuals and institutions respond. One is people spouting off racist crap, which you've posted on Facebook recently. The police departments acting like tantrum children, refusing to do anything. Politicians being passive aggressive and dragging their feet. Like there's all kinds of white strategies and responses that are basically there to reinforce white supremacy. And so that's what white backlash is. It comes like it's a type of white rage and fear.
Yeah, and and a lot of people talk about Trump being president as one of the kind of premier modern examples of white backlash,
yes.
Right? That we had a Black president for 8 years, and for many white people, consciously, but probably more importantly, unconsciously, this stirs this incredible fear. Right, the fear of slave uprisings, which is very deep-seated fear in the white consciousness. And so, for a Black person to make it to the White House is highly symbolic of that. And so many people talk about Trump being elected as a backlash to that. And
yes. And it's just to underscore what you just said. I see liberals in particular, and here I'm using liberal in the sense of people that huddle in the center of our political spectrum, all the time thinking that racism is this intentional choice and that racial resentment is a type of choice. But lots of people I know really think that Obama was racist and caused racial resentments and was bad for race relations. That's the language they use, and that Trump is actually righting the ship. So this there doesn't have to be any intention whatsoever for white backlash is an eruption against any perceived threat.
Right. Yeah. And this morning, now at the internet, I mean, I just think this is so hilarious. Like every single day now, you can read multiple articles of white people being caught doing racist things and then immediately saying, I am not a racist. So this morning I invented a new category for the DSM. This is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the diagnostic book for the psychology world. I think we need a new category there: racism denial syndrome. And and so it's white people that do racist stuff until they're caught, and then they immediately say, I am not a racist.
This
And they
conflicts
also
with my
seem,
deepest values.
yes,
Yeah.
and they also seem to not understand how the internet works, which seems to be a real part of this syndrome. Um,
What kind of medicine is there for that?
yeah, well, there's got to be some real deep healing and reflection.
Mhm.
Because a part of it, and that's why it's a denial syndrome, right? Is this incredible cutoff from our humanity and from our awareness, and so that's what allows this backlash to emerge. And I think the clearest focus of this backlash right now is going to be on this whole police abolition thing. And I just already see hordes of white people completely losing their cookies, so to speak, with this immense amount of fear. And again, Mark, I'm so sorry. The poor anarchists just is getting creamed once again. Maybe that's why you're so tired.
I'm grieved for my people. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, anarchy in the streets. What was that movie where like one night you get to do
The
whatever sick
purge.
thing? The
The
Purge,
purge.
right?
Yeah,
That has
that's what
been
people think.
yeah, that has been mentioned many, many times. And I'm laughing because otherwise I'd just be crying and swearing. So laughing is better. I mean, it is so kind of painful and insane. And part of what characterizes this backlash, of course, is, as I said, this unconscious reflexiveness. So you're not even willing to think about what people are talking about, right? It's just this knee-jerk, again, triggered emotional trauma kind of reaction.
No, and this is the interesting kind of responses I get. And I know there's lots of layers to this, so this isn't just coming from white backlash. But like I expect conservatives to like worship the thin blue line. I expect conservatives to say, look, this shows there's some need for some reforms. Like almost everyone's acknowledging that level. But what bothers me is there. One, people are starting to twist the language of defunding the police. By this, I mean predominantly white people, to saying, and it's just, they really mean just reforming it a little bit, like we've already been talking about. I'm like, no, that's not what the activists who have been taking the lead on this mean by defund. It's a step towards abolition, or pert near step towards abolition. The other thing is that I'm seeing the most vociferous reactions I'm seeing are from moderates who are always afraid of people getting too radical and ruining things. Like and that to me, it's hard for me not to interpret that as at least a cousin to white rage, because it's this sort of fear of loss of law and order. It's the same kind of dominant fear of you're going to ruin it for the rest of us. Right. That's basically what white backlash is like, you're going to ruin it. It's not coming from hatred in the conventional sense of people of color or black people. It's coming of a fear of loss of dominance or the status quo. And that's, to me, it's all of the same kind.
And the way I keep thinking on this video cast, we need to mention the pandemic at least every once in a while now.
Good call.
Right. I mean, this is exactly what we were hearing 6 months ago before the pandemic, right? We can't have Medicare for all because that's too radical and
it'll ruin
socialist.
It. Yeah.
It'll ruin it. It'll ruin our chances of winning the presidency. It'll ruin everything. Like, don't go there. And then the pandemic hits, right? And then everybody's like, holy crap, we need healthcare for everybody, right? And now and again, this is this lack of awareness. So now this next issue, and immediately that's the same reaction. Oh, you can't talk about that. It'll ruin it. Don't get too radical. It's the same exact thing.
Don't criticize Biden or Pelosi for being unwittingly racist and crappy, because that'll empower the other ones. Why we cannot fight Like, we need to be able to settle for a generic smiley face racism because we're afraid of worse racism. That's not even like what it's really about. I really ultimately don't think the people who are against this are really worried about that. I think it's more about a resentment piece. A couple comments coming in. Connie writes, people focus on the protests instead of what was the origin and what they are trying to accomplish. I've had people focus on the violence, and that is all they focus on. They don't understand how much Black people need to be seen and heard. This is the backlash I hear. Yeah, the shifting of what the emphasis is.
Yeah.
I could go off on that all day.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, we've talked about this before, and you read that great James Baldwin quote about that, right? I mean, we as white people need to have some very serious, you know, come to Jesus conversation about why are we more concerned about a Target store being looted than about a Black person being killed? Like that's a problem. That's a problem, right? We're way more concerned about that violence because, again, like this police abolition fear, it basically is like we're worried about us, right? We are the propertied class. We have money. We're safe. This is going to be a threat to us, and that's what we're really worried about, right?
Yeah, and right now, like, so it's, I don't want to assume all these voices are one voice, but it's hard for me not to interpret it a little bit this way. But I remember when all the stuff was burning and people were like, oh, this is horrible, pearls clutched, whatever. But there was some nuance, like people were saying, well, you know, the police precinct, that doesn't bother me as much. It's like, but these mom and pop shops. I'm like, okay, fair. Now, at least some of the people I've seen were saying that now that they've starting to arrest people for burning the third precinct, I'm hearing those same people who are like, well, you know, are now, you know, they're terrorists and they need to go and they're no better than the police. I'm like, yeah, they're better than the police. If you can't burn down a third precinct, then what can you burn down, Dan? That's what I want to know. Yeah. Another comment, Kathleen writes, I was just reading a commentary of Jeremiah. It talked about a deep holiness that comes in the midst of disruption. Right. I'd like to hear more about that, Kathleen, if you have more to say.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, you know, and again, we have these images of, you know, death and resurrection. And we like to talk about that, you know, and people will talk about, you know, the phoenix as a symbol of being burnt to ashes, right? And then rising. And, you know, the dark night of the soul and all of these spiritually images that do involve a deconstruction and then reconstruction. And they're groovy unless they actually have to happen to us. And then suddenly they don't feel so groovy anymore. And that's a big part of what the backlash is about, because again, white people have the privilege. And in order for things to change, the privilege needs to get redistributed. And, you know, our ego selves and the ego selves of the and so we are going to resist that. And you know, that's a big part of what's going on. So Maria's commenting.
Yeah. The backlash is focusing more on property than on people's lives. Yes. And I mean, there are all kinds of motives out there, but it seems like I'm getting more heat and frustration about the property stuff. And then every once in a while, nice white people who are doing that will say, oh yeah, and I'm worried about Black people too. Like, that's how it feels to me. Now, whether that's true or not, maybe my subjectivity is flawed, whatever. But there definitely seems like I saw much more anxiety about that than any killing I've seen. I want to go back to something you said, and I think it's a great metaphor, this deconstruction, reconstruction thing, when it comes to police abolition. I mean, I've known tons of people who've gone through a deconstruction where they find healing in the midst of it, and so then what comes after is an authentic expression of a new type of faith or belief, right? But I've also known and experienced in myself when there isn't enough healing, or there's still like a structure, like, so evangelicals who feel like they need to be right and have a certain kind of certainty, like that core of like dickish certainty staying there. And as they become atheists, they become fundamentalist atheists because that core structure is there. I think this is where people don't understand what this defunding thing is. It's not, we don't want to strip it down to just only having 50 murderers and then keep that and shift it over. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, now we're going to have 200 not murderers instead of 250 murderers. It's like, no, let's just we need to question everything. Right. And so part of the way Backlash is acting as though anything other than armed protectors of white dominance will cause us to go into the purge reality, right, where basically everyone is raped and murdered, basically.
Exactly. Yeah,
and I'm not saying that to be flippant. Those are the two things that come up. Those are the two things that are named that will happen if we don't have policing, as though the police actually prevent murder or rape, which they do not.
Right. I mean, this is the interesting thing, right? Is how disconnected from reality these comments are. And the other thing is that we have a very well-known historical example of this, which again, all of these white people that are freaking out about this would deny that they would be doing this. But, when abolitionists were saying in the 1830s and 40s, hey, we need to get rid of slavery, there were a lot of white liberal people who said, oh, that's way too extreme. Like, we can't do that. We just have to have a nicer, kinder slavery. We have to just reform slavery. And these people were, they were very serious about that. And Frederick Douglass just, would go off on these people, and other folks, but particularly him, was very strong in some of his writings about that. But it's exactly the same thing, folks. It's exactly the same thing. It's a structure in our society that is at its core evil and racist in its DNA. And we need to get rid of it. And then we need to figure out what sorts of structures do we need that are going to be better and humane and caring. And again, that fear, the people who are saying this now, I hate to say it, you would be the same people saying this in 1830 about slavery. You would be exactly the same people. And we need to look at that.
I think the Civil War comparison and everything leading up to it is really important because of a couple of issues. One, I still talk to people who are they're not conservatives, who think that the abolition movement made things worse because we were naturally going to like end slavery, and by them being instigators, it caused the Civil War, and so many people unnecessarily had to die. That's a logic that still exists, and it's the logic that existed then. And so, like, blaming the agitators rather than the slave owners, which is what's happening now. Like, that somehow Antifa and the anarchists and angry black people, which people are less likely to say that last one because whiteness tends to be performative when it feels guilty, but then not really willing to change anything when the chips are down. That's how whiteness works. And then the other piece of it is, like, if anyone hasn't seen this, I think it's Ken Burns. There's a great documentary on Reconstruction that hardly anyone has watched. There were tremendous and powerful gains made right after the Civil War that were completely rolled back on. And Congress, the president, everyone threw black people under the bus. And so many black people did end up, in some key ways, worse off for a long time. And there was a lot of violence. And so that birthed the Jim Crow era. This backlash thing is real. I don't even know if it's possible for us to overstate what could be coming. Sorry.
That's great. Let's go to the comments. I just, a funny little thing to.
Okay. Patricia writes, systems oppress through a rigid homeostasis. Dismantling is necessary. Education, child protection systems is next. that's the thing. This isn't just a police issue; it's a carceral issue. It's the whole system, from birth to the grave, including prisons, the way the legal system works, child protection, social services. People are right to point out that getting rid of the police won't end the racism if we just replace them with social workers. There's racism baked into that too. But right now we're trying to blunt the sword, but the whole system needs to be examined. So Patricia, that's right on. Kathleen writes, it is going to be very hard to get white people to see what is in it for them to give up white privilege. That's right. That's part of the work. If someone is going to get hurt, we want it to be someone else. We assume that someone has to get hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then Jeremy asks, where can we find the Ken Burns documentary? Just search Reconstruction documentary. I think every episode is available on the PBS website somewhere. So just Google that, PBS. You'll find it.
Yeah, and I think Kathleen's point is extremely important.
Yeah.
Because, and I was actually just talking with some folks at a Methodist church here in town yesterday about this, who are interested in starting to do some more serious anti-racism work. We white people do not understand what we have lost in the system of whiteness. We don't really understand how we have been damaged, how our humanity is blunted, how our fears rule us, how we are not fully participating in what Jesus talks about as the kingdom of God. And we have to realize that that's what we have to gain. That we have a tremendous amount to gain in terms of being able to participate in the world in a way that with much greater love and lack of fear and just sort of all kinds of things in terms of what a decent world could be like. But you're absolutely right, Kathleen, that most white people do not see that. And especially, again, the more privileged and comfortable people are, they think, well, I've got it all, and this is just about other people trying to get what I've got. Or those bad people getting what I've got. And we do need to learn about what we have lost and what we really have to gain. And again, there are all these images, right? Jesus says you got to lose your life to find it. We go, oh, that's nice, but not really.
It's not nice at all.
Yeah, and but he's serious about that, and in this case, white people have to lose their lives of whiteness to gain a life of justice and equality. We need to be talking a lot about that.
I think it's impossible to overstate this. I notice, and this is something I talk to people about all the time, that a lot of white response to racism, or realizing, oh no, I think I did something racist, is to kind of lean into a sort of performance mentality where we have to behave a certain way so that we don't feel bad. Like that's kind of a framework. And so then you get anxiety-ridden white people, and I feel like this all the time too. I understand it, trying to do good and be better. And that's kind of the framework. And that is toxic, because you cannot rely on your own altruism as the driving mechanism for your transformation. There has to be a certain healthy selfishness in there. You aren't just doing it so that you're a good guy to Black people. You're doing it because you're malformed and need to be transformed for your own good and for the good of other people. And when we don't do that, what happens is, like when there's no pressure on us to perform and no one's going to catch us, it'll be super easy to slide in to old racist patterns where we feel most comfortable. This is part of why it's toxic to be formed this way. And that is why it is really hard for people of color to trust white people, because when the chips are down, if there hasn't been real transformation, if it's just performative, it'll go away.
Yeah.
And so this is what the white backlash is when all of a sudden it becomes socially acceptable to push back, even just the moderate tendency to be like, well, we need to think about all sides or whatever. It becomes part of that white backlash that enables greater harm to come back upon, in this case, Black people. And it's going to happen. We have to fight with in solidarity without it being just like, I need to be a good white person making good so I don't feel bad. Anyways, I could go off on that for forever. So David wants to underscore what you said, Dan. We don't realize how we've been damaged by whiteness.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, and I do think that within white spaces that is not talked about enough.
No.
Because yeah, you know, people are motivated by a desire for something better, you know, to some degree.
Yeah.
And so I do think that has got to be lifted up a lot more. That's something I try to talk about all the time.
Maria writes, the white backlash to civil rights riots in Chicago left the neighborhood destitute and still deprived 50 years later, and it has all been blamed on Black people. We see this every time there's any kind of riots. There's like some sympathy, like, oh, they must suffer so much kind of mentality statements, but then it's like they get thrown under their bus. And in this case, we're seeing, like, I've been people seeing this wonderful promise from Walmart that if any communities that don't have police forces, they will refuse to rebuild their Walmarts. Like, we're going to keep Walmart from you unless there's police. So that's an example of this sort of thing.
Oh yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, absolutely. And I think you know, and again, this is in individuals. We've been talking a lot about kind of individuals talking about this. It also gets baked into systems, right? So part of backlash is also just inertia, right? So, so I had this absolutely horrible experience last night. The Police Oversight Commission of Minneapolis had this meeting. They were receiving public comments, so I went on there to make a comment. And again, I could talk about this for a long time. I was so mad last night. And these commissioners start off making these little public statements.
Let the rage flow, Dan.
and these were the most insipid, non-statement statements I could ever imagine coming from this group after what has happened. And it's very clear that these people who have been put in place by the city council basically are the kind of people who are not going to advocate for change, right? And so that is, and again, I'm not ignorant. I know that these oversight commissions have no power, but they could be advocating. And these people are not even doing that. And so again, that's a way that the white system has sort of baked inertia in. Right, this part of government that is supposed to advocate for just good policing, they are advocating for nothing. And so that can blunt any kind of momentum. And I had a really hard time not swearing, but I just told them they all need to resign, and we need to get some people in there that actually want to advocate for a decent public safety system, because they obviously weren't going to.
No,
all right, a couple more comments as we're coming to the end.
Karen says, say that again, Mark. The behavior of white progressives can be very harmful. Patronizing, reducing my identity solely to race, which is the flip side of the harmful colorblindness, and always trying to help. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just another way of centering this on whiteness.
Right.
Like, I'm seeing this a lot in comments, like somehow, and I fall into this. I'm not saying I'm beyond this by any means, but like a lot of the ways people talk about it, somehow George Floyd's death is becoming about them. I've seen people like profiteering off of this in a way, like using it to build their cachet. Just like I've been noticing people, evangelicals, evangelizing. I've been hearing more and more stories about fundraising and evangelizing off of George Floyd's death for like white evangelical churches. It's just another way of like saying, oh no, look at how I feel about this.
Right.
No transformation. It becomes all performance. I have had to ask people to stop sharing racist behavior with me because it is re-traumatizing, but to share it with other white people. White people need to do more work.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of our hopefully future guests, we're trying to figure it out. A Facebook friend, Lace, has a page called Lace on Race on Facebook. She was interviewed recently, and one of my favorite one-liners I've seen about this. She said, when white people think the work is basically just doing lots of reading and research on this, they just turn into well-read racists. Because the work isn't merely intellectual work or having the right postures or knowing the right things to say and do, which is how a lot of us treat it. It's about reshaping our relationships to each other and to our systems in a deeply fundamental level. And that you can only do that as a white person if you're going to make an ass of yourself. You have to be willing to be embarrassed, anxious, ashamed as part of the painful work. There's no way around it. You can't perform your way out of this.
Right. Yeah. And you have to learn how to be quiet and listen.
That's right.
Right. Like that's one of the biggest things, that white supremacy teaches us to talk and be in the front of things all the time. Right. And this is a big comment about institutions, right? How, and a friend of mine who's Black interim president of a seminary in Atlanta had this great thing he posted the other day that racial diversity hiring in academia is the equivalent of thoughts and prayers, which I thought was brilliant, right? That you hire one Black person and all the white people applaud and pat themselves on the back, but you take those same white people and you say, hey, why don't you hire 8 Black folks and why don't you let them set the agenda? And then suddenly they're all freaking out and running scared. And that's when the backlash hits, right? And one of the things we've seen in these uprisings is tremendous Black leadership. And the Black leadership, they are the ones saying, we need to abolish the police. And now suddenly the white people are like, no, we don't really want to listen to you.
Let's go looking for the Black people who agree with us and give them
right. Yeah. So do the work, and we continue to try to do the work. And thanks for hanging out with us again, and for all the great comments. And we will see you tomorrow when Mark will be even more sleepy.
No, I'm going to take a nap or something.
All right.
I'm going to find a way to catch up. See y'all.
Bye.